Welcome to the Effortless English Show with the world's #1 English teacher, AJ Hoge, where AJ's more than 40 million students worldwide finally learn English once and for all, without the boring textbooks, classrooms, and grammar drills. Here's AJ with a quick piece to help you learn to speak fluent English effortlessly.
I'm AJ Hoge, the author of Effortless English. Learn to speak English like a native. Join my VIP program at effortlessenglishclub.com. Join at effortlessenglishclub.com. Speaking of my VIP program, I'm doing a teleseminar talking to VIP members tonight. I do this only with my VIP members. Sometimes we have a teleseminar, sometimes a webinar where I'll talk to VIP members. Some VIP members have a chance to chat with me. It's nice to hear their voices and little bit of practicing English, sharing success stories, sharing our ideas. One of my favorite things to do with our great, super motivated VIP members. Now, this is something important, by the way, about my VIP program. I should mention this. I need to remember to mention this more often. The VIP program is not for everyone. I'll be honest about this. Is not for everyone. Honestly, I don't want everyone in the VIP program. The VIP program is for my most motivated English learners. It doesn't matter so much your level, okay? You don't need to be super good at English. That's not important. It's not about level. It's not about ability. Oh, the rain's coming. 1 second, I gotta run. I'm getting rained on. Help. I'm sitting by the river right now, and it just started raining really heavily. Ooh, gotta run. Run, get under the bridge. Woo, woo, woo. Okay, 1 second. Running. Woo. That rain came from nowhere. I didn't see it coming. Okay. I'm under the bridge now. So I now have some shelter from the rain. It was cloudy, but I didn't think it was going to rain, and then suddenly, boom, rain. Fairly heavy. Okay, what was I talking about? Oh yeah, VIP. Sorry about that. A little surprise. Surprise rainstorm. So my VIP program is not for everyone. And the point is that you do not have to be super good at English. Of course, that's my job. My job is to make you super good at English. Speak fluently. Speak powerfully. Speak effortlessly. You'll learn to do that when you join the VIP program. I do want super motivated learners. People who really want to speak English powerfully and well. That's not everybody. And that's okay. It's okay. I know some people are less motivated. That's fine. Some people have kind of simple goals for their English. You know, they don't need to speak fluently, or they don't want to. They don't care about that. They just want to improve a little bit. They want to have a kind of a basic level of communication in English. That's fine. That's totally fine. I have no problem with that, but VIP is not for those people. I was talking yesterday during our live show, the live book club show, about teaching and how important a very important part of teaching and education is that the student must also be ready. That trying to use force, right? Just to force learners, students, all the time, always trying to force them. It's a terrible way to teach. It's a terrible method of education. The best relationship, right? The best relationship between teachers and students, it's a cooperation, right? Where each one is giving something. The student has to give motivation, curiosity, energy, a real desire to improve and learn. Must have that. And of course, the teacher, a good teacher, a great teacher, must give real love for the student and a real desire to help the student, the learner, succeed. A focus on them, a focus on contribution. You need both sides. If there's only one side, it doesn't work, right? You can have a great teacher who really cares about the student, really loves them, really wants to help them succeed, is focused on them, focused on contribution. But if the student has no energy, if the student doesn't care, if the student is not motivated, if the student doesn't really want to learn or to improve, it won't work. It won't work. It's not a relationship. It's one way. And this is one of the big problems in schools, especially with older kids. You see it as the kids get older, this problem becomes bigger and bigger and bigger, where a lot of the students, more and more of the students, just don't care anymore. Of course, this is because they have suffered in the schools for many years. It's a sad situation. I don't blame those students so much, but it's still the reality. And the reality is, in that situation, no teacher can really help them at that point. If a student really just does not care and does not want to learn, it doesn't matter how good the teacher is. It doesn't matter. They're not going to do it. It has to be both ways. Now, of course, the opposite is also true, although if a learner is motivated and independent, they will eventually find the right teacher for them. That's the best situation. But again, you can have a great student who's really super curious and interested, but if you force them, if you put them into a classroom, you force them into a class with a bad teacher, a teacher who doesn't really care, using textbooks and methods that are terrible, well, then again, the results are very bad. You know this from your own English classes. Maybe you loved English or were interested in English. Maybe you were very motivated, but then you would go to these classes and you use these terrible methods and it didn't work and you did not succeed. But the good news is you kept going, you stayed motivated. You stayed motivated and you became an independent learner, and you eventually found Effortless English. So when I say Effortless English, and especially my VIP program, not for everyone, this is what I mean. I mean, it's a relationship. So I do really care and I really want to help you, and I do my best with the VIP lessons. I need and I want learners, members, who will do their part, who are motivated, who are energetic, who really care, who really want to improve, who will use the lessons every day. They don't work if you don't use them, right? It doesn't matter how good the lessons are. They're fantastic. If you don't use them every day, obviously you get no result. So this is why I say I want the most motivated, and indeed that's what we have with VIP. With the VIP program, it's the most motivated English learners. That's why it's such a great community. It's so powerful because the members are so motivated, so positive, And this is why they succeed. This is why the VIP program is so successful, because of this combination. It's the great course and the great lessons and my effort on one side, but also the great motivation, the great energy, the great caring from VIP members. That combination is super, super, super powerful. That's how you get the best results. So I want you to join my VIP program when you are motivated, when you truly want to succeed, when you really want to speak English powerfully, fluently, effortlessly, when you know that you are ready and that you will listen to the lessons each day, when you are committed. Right? You're motivated, you're committed, you're going to continue with the program for, 6 months, 8 months, a few years, many years. It's up to you, but you're going to continue. You know, 1 month's not enough, 3 months is not enough. You're going to continue and you're going to be motivated. You're going to put your energy, do your part. It's that combination, me plus you. That's the super powerful combination that makes the VIP program so successful. It's why VIP members are so successful. You're ready for this? Join my VIP program at effortlessenglishclub.com. Again, that's effortlessenglishclub.com. Let's talk about, again, one of my favorite words. One of my favorite words is fundamental. Fundamental, because I've used this word a lot. Fundamental. Or fundamentals. Right? So you know what this word means, right? Fundamental. Fundamental means kind of the root. That's another way to imagine this word, fundamental. It's like the root. It's the most important, right? It's the most basic, important skills or ideas, for something, right? Well, I've been thinking a lot about the fundamentals of home education, independent learning, specifically for children, for kids. So if you're going to homeschool or home education for your children, I know it can feel overwhelming, like, oh, what do I teach them? And we have two parts of education and homeschooling, let's say. On one hand, there are some basic fundamentals, right? There are some basic fundamentals, skills, knowledge, ideas, values that you want them to learn. They need to learn, even if they don't really want to in this moment right now. They're necessary. For example, learning to read is a very obvious one, probably the most important one. They need to learn to read to function in our modern society and to become independent learners for their whole life, their whole lives. They need to read. Well, that's an obvious fundamental skill. They need to learn that. You must teach that to them. It's not really a choice, okay? It doesn't matter if they're curious or not about reading. Finally, in the end, you have to teach this to them. They must learn it. Now, I recommend that you do it skillfully and help them to get curious about reading, to want to learn to read. It's not too difficult. Most kids are very curious when they're young. If you read to them, if you just get lots of books with pictures and you read to them when they're very little, so they look at the books and you're reading to them and you're reading to them, they'll start to love books naturally. And then very naturally, as they get a little older, they will want to learn to read. And then you just, little by little, you teach them to read. It's pretty effortless, honestly. So that's an easy fundamental skill, but it's an obvious example. And of course, the other obvious example would be basic math skills. Again, we need this, at least the basic math for money, finances, right? The basic math that all of us still use as adults. They may choose as they get older, or you may choose as they get older to add more advanced math, but certainly the basic math that we all need is another fundamental skill. Those are obvious, but there's also something else I would like to think about. Like what other fundamental works, fundamental knowledge, fundamental stories should you teach your children? It's actually a little bit difficult to answer this question. I've been thinking about it myself. I thought, okay, so what would be, for example, books. Let's just focus on books. That's probably the most important one. What are the most fundamental books? What books do you think, well, I really think my children should read these books or understand these stories? But there's so many. Even if you ignore modern books, just ignore all the modern books, and you just look at the old ones, there's still hundreds and hundreds of them that you could decide are important. That's too many. Because remember, with homeschooling, we have two sides. We've got the fundamentals, which really, as the coach, as the teacher, you're going to teach your kids. I don't want to say force them, but you're kind of. Okay? You know they're important, and you're going to encourage them, and you're going to teach these things to them, and try to get them curious about these things, because you feel they're so important. But you don't want too many of those. This is one of the problems in schools. They try to do too many. They try to force too much onto the kids. Then there's no time and no energy for the kids to follow their own. So you need that. You need to let the kids follow their own curiosity. That needs to be, let's say, 80% of homeschooling. If we use the kind of 80-20 rule, I think that's a nice way to think about it. So 20% of your homeschool time, of your kids' independent learning, 20% would be the fundamentals that you as the parent choose. You decide are the most important. That's the 20%. Okay, we're just going to do this. You have to learn to read. You got to do this basic math. You try to make it interesting. Try to bring it into their interests, all those things. But in the end, you've got to teach it. Now, part of that 20%, also, you're going to choose a few books, just a few, that are part of your family's culture, history, heritage, that you feel are the most important, that they're really kind of foundations for your family or for your culture even. You don't want to choose too many. It's possible to choose hundreds and hundreds, but it's too many. Remember, they're going to be lifelong learners. They can read all these things as they get older. So I've been thinking about this myself, and I'm thinking, okay, just for the West, what would I do? For me, my family. And I thought about it, and I've decided on 2 or 3. For me, the foundational books or stories would be the Iliad, the Odyssey, and maybe the Aeneid. The Iliad and the Odyssey are ancient Greek stories. Some of the earliest true literature, true epic stories that we have for the West, meaning the Mediterranean area, really. So when I think about it and I look at all the different possibilities, the possible books that I would choose, possible stories, these two, I see these two as the roots, as the foundations of Western culture, history, and including American. When I say Western, it really means kind of European, right? And that would include the Americas, really, North and South America. So these are my choices. Now, you could choose something else, right? You might choose something different. The Bible would be a possibility. Maybe you would choose the Bible. Oh, that's the foundation. Especially, very Christian families, that would be a logical choice. And, others, some people might say, well, what about Egypt, ancient Egypt? That would also be a possible choice, choosing stories or mythologies from ancient Egypt. But for me, when I think about it, and especially as an American, for me, it just feels like Greece, ancient Greece, is really the starting point, right? Especially Athens, Athenian Greece, the philosophy of Socrates and Plato and Aristotle, the first beginnings that we know of the kind of modern democracy. So there's that political foundation that connects to the United States today, or I don't know about today, but our history at least. So you see what I'm doing, though? I'm trying to narrow it down to just a very, very simple choice. These two, the Iliad and the Odyssey, right? That's just two books. That's two books, two stories as the foundation. Okay, I'm going to teach my children the Iliad and the Odyssey. How would I do this then? Well, what I will do, is when they're young, once they, I don't know, maybe age 5, like kind of kindergarten age, typical kindergarten age, I would get some versions of the Iliad and the Odyssey that have pictures that are written for kids. You can find these in different languages. Of course, for me, it would be an English translations, but kids' versions, meaning, the original Iliad and the Odyssey are written more as poetry, but I'd get a more kind of normal, what's called prose version, which is just telling the basic story of the Iliad and the Odyssey with pictures. And then I would just read it to them. So they would learn the characters. They would learn the basic story, right, for the Iliad, and then the Greeks and the Greek army coming to attack the Trojans, and learn the basic stories and what happens with the Greek heroes and the Trojan heroes, and right? They would just get the basic idea of it and make it exciting and interesting for a small child. And then do the same thing with the Odyssey, which also has some interesting adventures in it, with Odysseus coming home from the war. That would be my first teaching of the Iliad and the Odyssey, and it would just be basically storytelling. I would add it into any other books they were reading, just so they become familiar with it. I'd make it exciting and try to make it really interesting so that they would enjoy and love these stories. Then later, a few years later, when they were good readers in kind of elementary school age, I would use the same kids' versions, or maybe find, depending on their age, I might even just get a real translation of the Iliad and the Odyssey, but a kind of direct modern translation. There are lots of different translations of the Iliad, for example. Some of them are more like poetry, which they're a little more difficult to read and understand, but others are more direct and modern. The vocabulary is direct, the sentences are shorter and more direct and more modern, much more clear and easy to understand. For elementary school age, I'd get one of those translations, and then we would read it again, and this time they would read it themselves. Maybe we would read it together. They could read it out loud to me sometimes. I might read it out loud to them. We would all read, chapter 1 together and then talk about it. And at that age, maybe we would draw pictures and imagine, what happens in the battles and the heroes and things. And we would go through the Iliad and the Odyssey again at that level. And then finally, as they got older still, probably around the middle school level, we would again read and discuss the Iliad and the Odyssey. This time maybe I would use a little bit more poetic translations, which would be a little bit more difficult vocabulary. But again, the same story, so they would already know the stories very well at this time, because they started when they were very little learning the story, and then when they're in elementary school level, they're have read one version of it and discussed it again, and now they're doing it again, but more kind of the real, full, more adult versions of the Iliad and the Odyssey. And we'd do the same thing. We'd read them, we'd go through chapter by chapter and discuss it, and of course at that level, with them being older, we could discuss more of the deeper ideas in these two great stories. And then possibly again one more time at the high school level, we could all go through once again, reading maybe the more challenging translations, maybe reading a couple translations at the same time and comparing them, and really going deeply then finally at the teenage level, going quite deeply into the meaning underneath the story. What are the messages? What are the meanings? What are the lessons we can learn from these stories? What makes these stories so powerful that thousands of years later we're still reading them? We still find them powerful. We would have a much deeper, obviously more adult discussion at that point. And so all through their education then, from the earliest time, kindergarten, right up until their teenage years when they're about to become independent, you would have these foundational books. In our example, the Iliad and the Odyssey, you'd have these two foundational books going through their whole education. We'd keep circling back to these foundational books again and again and again, learning from them. And in this way, they would learn these foundational books very, very deeply. Again, the opposite of what happens in school, right? In school, you read some book one time. Oh, now we go to the next, then the next, then the next, then the next, then the next. The school's constantly forcing the kids to read more and more and more and more books. And the kids don't appreciate any of those books, or usually don't appreciate. I didn't appreciate any of them because they were just being forced on me. They were unconnected. We didn't learn them deeply at all. It was just read one book, now on to the next one, and the next one, and the next one, and there was nothing connected to it. So this is a really great method. It's not the only method for homeschooling. You can do it other ways, but I like this idea, this kind of 80-20 idea, that the 20% is foundational, the foundational skills that are most important, reading and math and a few others, and a few foundational books that you come back to again and again and again. You're starting at a very young age, and then you keep coming back to them. And I prefer old classic books that are at the root of, my or our culture, heritage, background. You can see you could do the same thing. Let's say religiously. For a Buddhist, one of the foundational stories would probably be the story of Gautama Buddha. And there are many stories about Buddha's, from his childhood all through his life until his old age. And so again, you could get versions that are more for children, kind of very simple with pictures and things, and you would teach those at the very young level, and then you could get a little more advanced versions of the elementary school level, and then when you start getting into the middle school level, or even early elementary school, you start talking more about the ideas and more about the actual, philosophies and teachings and religion of Buddhism, getting deeper and deeper and deeper. And you would, if you're a Christian, you would do this with the Bible, the same approach. If you're Muslim, you would do it with the Quran, same approach, right? So you would, and those would be, your foundational books. I recommend if religion's important to you, of course, choose a religious one, and then I would recommend choosing a couple cultural or historical ones, and these would be different for different countries. Like, for example, if you're Iranian, if you're from Iran, living in Iran, well, Persia has such a, that's one of the old great civilizations of humanity. So you probably wouldn't choose the Iliad or the Odyssey for your family, but rather choose, some one or two of the oldest, most classical Persian stories, literature. If you're Indian, the Ramayana would be a good one possibility. The Upanishads, but I overall I think that the old ones are best. You want to try to go dig back into your history, your heritage, and get back to what you believe is the root. You don't have to go all the way back to the cavemen, okay? But you want to go back to find some kind of literature, certain books or poems that go back to kind of what you feel are the roots of your history, your culture. And just choose a couple of those and let those be the foundation. I think this is a much better approach instead of having a list. Sometimes you'll see a list of, the 50 most important books in the West, or the 100 most important books in the West. That's way too many. That's too many for children. It'd be great to read all those books as an adult, but for children, most of the books on those lists, I've looked at many of those lists, and most of the books are far too advanced for kids. Teenagers could maybe handle some of them, but for children, forget it. And they're too many. Too many. Remember, they're lifelong learners. They don't have to read everything in the first 18 years. Okay, they're going to continue reading when they're 19 and 20 and 30 and 40 and 50. So just imagine they can save some of those books for their adulthood. But for the West, you will find, and everyone does not agree, but you will find that many, 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 many people, including me, would choose the Iliad and the Odyssey as the beginnings of Western literature. You could argue for a few other ones, but for me, those are the two. So I'm just going to focus on those two. I give my children the root, and then from there, what's so cool about this is that from there, so much connects to those. When you have a few fundamental works, you can then, as you learn those fundamental those fundamental stories or books, you can then let your children become curious about everything else connected to them, right? Because connected to the Iliad, let's just start with the Iliad. Well, the Iliad is for young kids, especially boys, I think, it's a really interesting story. I mean, it's big battles and fights. It's very exciting. And then, of course, it connects to so much more. If they get excited about the Iliad, they're going to start asking more questions, because the Iliad talks about the Greek gods. So we can start getting into Greek mythology. It's an easy connection to the Iliad. Of course, talks about Greek history and Greek battles and military. So from the Iliad, it would be very easy. Well, what happened after the Trojan War, and and then you can start, right? Then you can just keep going and learning a huge amount about Greek history. As I mentioned, you can connect that to Greek philosophy. Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle being the big three. And that can connect to, Alexander the Great. And then from there, we can connect the Iliad and the Odyssey also to Rome. We could easily do that by using the Aeneid. The Aeneid is another classical poem, story, written by a Roman, Virgil. And Virgil, when he wrote the Aeneid, his idea was he was kind of not copying, but he was inspired by Homer, the Iliad and the Odyssey, because the Romans also read and studied the Iliad and the Odyssey and appreciated it. And Virgil, he wanted to write a story about kind of like kind of a little bit like a sequel to the Iliad. And he wanted to write a sequel to the Iliad that would give like the story of Rome, how Rome began. Kind of it's not truly historical, it's more like a mythology. But the idea is of the Aeneid is that there's the Trojan War, the Greeks fighting the Trojans. The Greeks win. They attack and they destroy the city. And then Virgil's idea, his story begins there a little bit after that. So Virgil's story is that some of the Trojans survive, including one of their big heroes named Aeneas. That's where the name comes from. So Aeneas is a Trojan, and he and his men, they have to run away, right? They've got to get away from Troy because the Greeks win. They got to run away or else the Greeks will kill them all. So they get in boats and they sail away to escape. And then this is where the Aeneid starts, the story. That the escaping Trojans, they have a lot of adventures. They land in North Africa for a while, and then they eventually arrive in Rome and, Italy. And they have some more fights and adventures, and then the story, and they win. And the story of the Aeneid is basically this is how the Roman Republic began. This is how Rome, the Roman Empire, began. That it was these Trojans getting away from, escaping from the Trojan War, and then coming and eventually landing in Italy and joining with the local people there. And then that is how Rome was born. Was that the true history? I don't know. Probably not. But again, though, it's an important piece of classic literature, in this case Roman. So you could, again, this connections, right? The natural connections. You could do the Iliad and the Odyssey, and this would lead to reading all kinds of things and exploring all kinds of things about Greece, the history, the mythology, all of this, and you keep going forward in history, and then you're like, whoa, what happened after that? Well, then Alexander the Great. What happened after Alexander the Great? Then you start looking at the Romans. So at that point you can say, well, why don't we read the Aeneid? So you read the Aeneid. This talks about the Romans. And then now you've got more connections. You read about the Aeneid. This gives, and it's another book, another poem of classical literature. And that connects to all of Roman history that comes after that story. And who wrote the Aeneid? Oh, now we can look at Virgil, and we can look at the Roman emperors and the Roman Empire and the Roman Republic that was before that, and the, on and on and on and on and on. It connects to so many things, and you just let your child follow their curiosity. That's the 80% of homeschooling, where the child's curiosity, the child's interest is leading you. You're the coach to help them with this, but their natural curiosity is, you're kind of going along and following it. So this is how you kind of do both. Having your fundamentals that you choose as the parent. That's the 20%. And then the 80%. The 80% will come from your child. Some of that 80% probably will connect to those fundamentals, right? If you use the Iliad and the Odyssey, then probably hopefully your child will get curious about some of these things, and you'll start connecting the Iliad and the Odyssey to lots and lots and lots of other things. Or maybe not, if that's okay too. Maybe your child is more into nature, like my nephew, and maybe that 80% will be more focused on plants and animals and outdoors things and that kind of stuff. That's also okay. With this kind of system, you will see that your child will be okay with the 20%. They're not going to fight against you about the 20%, the fundamentals that are necessary, especially if you do it skillfully, right? Don't just say, you must learn this, right? But you make it kind of interesting, right? You especially when you start young, but at any age, you make it interesting. You do your best to help them connect to these fundamentals. But most of the time, the child is maybe not the boss, but they are cooperating with you. You're partners in learning. That should be the feeling, right? It's just what I was talking about before with my VIP program. There's two sides. Well, in homeschooling, it's the same. With younger children, as the parent, of course you're the guide, of course you're the leader, of course you have to choose a lot of things, especially reading and basic math, and a few basic stories like this. Of course you do. But you're not just this big boss on top of your child and you don't care about your child. Of course not. They're your child. You love them. And so it's still kind of a partnership. You're the adult and the leader, but you are still looking for your child's curiosity, your child's interests, and each child is different. And you're responding to that, and they feel that, and they know that. So it's a partnership, right? You're both contributing. You are encouraging them to contribute their curiosity and to follow it, and you're helping them to do that. When they become curious about something, you help them to learn more about it. If they're interested in birds, then you help them go to the library and get books about birds and watch videos about birds and whatever. Maybe go outside and look at birds and identify birds, right? You're working together. It's a teamwork effort. You see how different this is from school? Where in school, the students really, it's not a partnership. The students are like the slaves and the teacher's the master, right? Or the boss. The students can't come in and say, I want to learn about birds today. Well, doesn't matter. Tough luck. Today we're studying something else. You're not going to learn about birds. Sorry. They don't care because they have 20, 30 other kids and they have a textbook plan they must follow. The child is not participating at all. They're not able to add anything. Of course, that's why they lose their curiosity. That's why they become frustrated. That's why when they're older, so many of them just don't care anymore. They don't have the motivation anymore. They don't have the curiosity anymore because for years and years and years, their curiosity was ignored. They were not partners. This is why I love homeschooling so much, because you're a partner with your child. This is why also it helps your relationship so much with your children, brings you closer together, makes you a closer family because of this. Because the child feels this. They feel that you're a partner together. Of course you're above them as the parent because they're little children. They don't have a problem with that. In fact, they need that and they want that. They want your leadership. But you're a good leader and you love them, and so they are still giving their curiosity. You're still responding to them. It's both of you working together, cooperating together. You're making more decisions when they're really little, of course, when they're young, but it's still cooperation. Right? You're not ignoring what they're interested in. You don't ignore their excitement. You don't ignore what they love. You don't ignore their interests. The exact opposite. You respond to them. And they feel it, and this brings you closer. And then, of course, as you get older and as they get older, they begin to become more and more independent and more the boss. Their interest, their curiosity, their decisions become more and more important as they gain responsibility. And so you'll find that as they reach their teenage years, that it becomes more kind of 50-50. It's a little more even, where they are making a lot of choices themselves. I just want to read this. They just go get books from the library. They just choose them themselves. They don't even ask you. They just go. They want to read something. They just go read it. Right? They're becoming more and more independent, but they're still cooperating with you. And now you're more of a mentor. You're making fewer of the decisions, and you're more having discussions with them. Well, okay, I want you to learn. Let's do the Iliad again. Right? You can still do that, and you can explain to them why you want to do it, and let's do it together. It's still cooperation. But gradually, as they get older, they're getting more and more of the power. They're becoming more and more their own boss with you. And first, you've got most of the power when they're little, and then gradually it changes. And then, of course, by the time they're 16, 17, 18, they are mostly independent learners at this point. At that point, you mostly become an advisor. They're making almost all the decisions about what they want to read and focus on. There may be a few things that you feel are very important, and you still guide them about those things, but by the time they're 16, 17, 18, they should be very, very, very independent, but still appreciating you, still working with you as a coach, coming to you and asking you questions, asking for your advice. Each day, each week, having discussions with you about what they're learning and reading, you giving some suggestions sometimes, but it's very, very much kind of an equal partnership at that point. They have no reason to rebel against you at that point, because you're their advisor, you're their supporter. You're on the same team. It's fantastic. It's fantastic, and it's so much better than school. Anyway, those are my thoughts for now. I'll be talking a lot more about this subject. I'll give you more and more specific ideas about how you can do homeschooling. I prefer the word home education. I would like you to join me in that same kind of partnership. Join my VIP program. Right? We both are in it together to help you speak English powerfully, fluently, and effortlessly. To be confident when you speak English and think in English. You do that when you join my VIP program. Join my VIP program today. Join today at effortlessenglishclub.com. That's effortlessenglishclub.com.